reference for you. If you need one.
Hello, Jim. Nice to see you.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah. Right.
Here's some, text that we'll be using today.
You sent it out.
I sent it out, but I just in case.
So I just printed it real
You
quick.
did print
On
it?
my way here, and now I'm reading it.
I
That's
did
right.
not check my.
Some ways, even if it's the assistant position, it's assistant.
Test. Excuse me. All right.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I see, there's this conflict that's taking place in Gaza, with the, I don't know whether it's going to escalate, but, this Islamic Jihad is a proxy for Iran. And so the question is, how rational is Iran? It's an issue that I try to get at with the Israeli diplomatic,
Excellent.
not the military person,
Right.
not really.
Yeah,
as compared to,
I'm glad
to
you called
North
it.
Korea.
I'm glad things are going
And he
well,
seemed to think that North Korea was more
and sometime
rational
soon we should
Really,
have a-
Than Iran.
than Iran.
That's
Yes,
true.
yes.
Well, because North Korea doesn't have an express purpose to destroy anybody.
Okay.
He just wants to be kind of taken seriously. But it's not they don't have a goal.
Yeah.
Well, I just got a call from a former employee who's effectively like my additional son. He's a great guy, and periodically he just calls to check up on me. In fact, usually he literally calls me around Thanksgiving and Mother's Day and things like that, which is funny. But he's a great guy, and I'm very proud of the job I did mentoring him and getting him into the system. So
Well, it's nice
it's nice
that he remembers and.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy, and I mean when I think of him as a kid because he's so. To me, he's young, but
Pass
he's
one
like
of these to Karen.
late 30s or 40 or something now. So.
That's a kid.
But,
Oh, you printed it out
I printed
already?
it out, yeah.
Okay, I did
I didn't
not.
get the other piece though.
It was previous. I'd
Oh,
sent
that's
it out
from
a
the
while.
previous, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then I
did
have
not.
it, okay.
It's part of chapter 3, which
Right,
I
I
sent
have
out quite a while.
I saw that there was something in there, but I
Yeah.
didn't know if there was another
We put
piece.
a copy for
I
you.
passed
Oh,
one
never
over.
mind.
oh, okay,
Are we
thank
using
you.
chapter 3 tonight and this, or just this?
I'll bet you just this. There's so much here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi, Sharon.
yeah, those are so tempting, and I'm trying to.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
I was in New York over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie had a big party.
Right, she
She
got
got her Doctor of Divinity.
That's right. That's right. I got mine
It was
last year.
beautiful.
You
I'm
did?
so glad.
That's okay. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah. 25 years.
You have to be 25 years in divinity before you can get a doctorate of divinity? You have to be 25 years? Holy mackerel, that's like the most demanding
It's an
doctorate.
honorary degree. We didn't do anything.
Right.
But but the fact is that like some people joke about it as DD, Dr. Divinity stands for didn't die, as if they just give it to everybody.
Exactly.
Which is true, but I agree with that. But I think of it as like I survived it. Like I wasn't killed by the synagogue.
Is there a special robe that you wore?
Well, a special like one of these things, not a robe.
Good.
The collar, whatever. Yeah.
I mean, look, the fact is this. So when we're ordained with 2 degrees. Ordination, and a crummy master's degree, which doesn't really mean anything. I mean, it's just kind of like they give you something because they don't know how to give you 5 years of graduate school and not have you come out with some sort of degree, and so they give you a master's degree. But it doesn't really, but the fact is that in the last 25 years, I really have become a different type of intellect and based upon my own personal studying and just, like, you don't just, I'm constantly reading and studying and thinking and reading and studying and thinking. So therefore, my point being is that, so the fact that they give you this honorary degree, it's almost like we recognize that since you've left, you've become considerably more of the scholar than you were when you just left. And
well, you've been studying.
Right. It was kind of funny. There's a really funny story that I can share with you, which I actually told the student cantor just recently. It's about a Bible professor that I had, whose name was Alan Cooper. And maybe if you're a real great lover of music of the 60s, you know who he is. He's famous.
What was his name?
Alan Cooper. He's famous. And when I tell you who he was, you're going to be like, really? So, Alan Cooper, who was my Bible professor and one of the great, great biblical scholars of the world, was the original Bowser of Sha Na Na.
No way.
At Woodstock.
No way.
At
no
Woodstock.
Not the Bowser that was on TV.
No, not the Bowser that was
The
on
other
TV, the original one, the ones that was at Woodstock and the whole, right, at Woodstock. Anyway, so, I mean, it's amazing, right? So, anyway, I was sitting there talking with him one day, and I can go into all the reasons why I was talking. Let's just forget, because it's too long. But long and short of it, I was talking with him, and we're talking about my thesis, which we all have to write this thesis before we're ordained. And it's like, it's a paper, essentially a paper that I wrote, but it's really what it is essentially 5 papers that I wrote that are all thematically related and then put together as various different chapters to equal a thesis of 120 pages of. But and the point though is that we were talking about it, and he says it's not like it's really any contribution to modern scholarship, right? This thesis that we work on for an entire year, but he's like you don't really think. And I'm like, you're right. It's not. It's just research, And again, it's a lengthy project. There's no doubt. It's also something which has helped me become more fluent in a certain area. True, but the fact is that
it supposed to be a contribution to modern?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I guess they would love it, but they don't really expect it.
Yeah, I mean, for any profession of the sciences where PhDs are common. You would know much more than me, but my impression is that for every 100 published, maybe one is a significant contribution.
I don't know. I think a legitimate PhD dissertation is.
PhDs
are contributing.
have to be,
they are.
or they don't
They're
get
required to
approved.
be.
It has to be something new and
right.
worthy.
Okay.
Mine was, and ours, that's why why ours isn't like a dissertation. Ours is a thesis, meaning, for lack of a better word, just a bunch of term papers, sewn together and right, that are on the same topic, kind of, but in different ways, and it just kind of adds to like this kind of thing, which is, wow, you really know your stuff in this regard, but that doesn't mean that you know your stuff or you know something new that others don't know.
So was he your advisor?
No.
Maybe you just didn't get it.
Well, but the point is, so now all of that leading to, back to the original point, which is when we were first ordained, the best they could do was just give us like this master's degree and then rabbinical ordination, because again, they knew that we certainly, after 5 years of graduate school, deserved a master's degree. They could, right? But it was like who cares? What mattered was your ordination. Point is that. But since then, in 25 years, I still haven't created any real contribution, I don't think, to modern scholarship. But I am much more like on top of a breadth of thinking and learning and studies that I never really was prior. I certainly know Torah billion times better. Talmud, my God, I know a billion times better. And and history so much better. Maybe the one thing that I've just never really stuck with is philosophy. I've kind of allowed that one to just to kind of simmer. I never really liked the philosophy.
Just because you haven't published doesn't mean you haven't come up with original formulation and analysis and shared it.
That's true. It's a good point. But it's not published or anything. My point is that, so they give you this Doctor of Divinity. It's not meant to really be a legitimate doctorate. Rather, it's meant to be, again, honorary. But it still is meaningful to me. I was really touched by it. Like, I felt like, it's like, I feel like, 25 years is not nothing. And so, mazel tov to Debbie Bravo, which is where this whole conversation started, for getting her Doctor of Divinity. I saw Facebook pictures of it, so I was aware of it too. All right, 7:03. Let's get started. Our class is starting to dwindle down to really only the diehards. So Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher k'tshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise you, our God, for commanding us to busy yourselves in the words of Torah.
Amen.
Interesting. That was Sharon who left us. Interesting that Shimon Bar Yochai won't use will kind of feel very similar to those thoughts about busying yourselves in the words of Torah, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about him today. So, because the next Mishnah is written by Shimon Bar Yochai, so we're going to talk about him right now. Now, let's start this way. So Shimon Bar Yochai, or Ben Yochai, welcome back, Sharon. Welcome back, Sharon. Happy to have you back. But so Shimon Bar Yochai, or Shimon Ben Yochai, is famous. One of the more famous sages. I would say he's not Akiva level, but he's one step below. Many would argue he's above Akiva, but like in terms of how well known he is to the random, average, everyday person, maybe less so, not as quite as known as Akiva, but in terms of if you go to the ultra-Orthodox community, they would argue he is even greater than Akiva. I'll tell you about that later. Actually, I'll tell you about it now. The day of his death is understood to be the day called Lag BaOmer, which is a holiday, 33rd day of the Omer. That's the period between second day of Pesach, 49 days, and Shavuot. And the 33rd day of the Omer period, so we are 33 days away from the second day of Pesach. So we're a month and a couple days later, right? Happens to be today, Lag BaOmer. So ironically, we're learning about Rabbi Shimon Ben Yochai on his yahrzeit. Okay, now, and to this day, and you might remember from, I think it was 2 years ago, to this day, ultra-Orthodox Jews flock to the town of Meron, which is in the Galilee, and they visit his grave. And really, millions, maybe that's an exaggeration because it can't be millions, hundreds of thousands of people go to this tiny town of Meron. It's kind of like going back to the Woodstock conversation. Obviously, like when cars and cars just kind of like on the one road leading to this to where the concert was. And if what you might remember is I think it was 2 years ago that they overran the location and then the bridge or something collapsed,
Right.
and all these people died and injured, and it was just, and they had said it's like this bridge was never made for this amount of foot traffic and that much weight, and it was like, and everyone was blaming everybody else, and the whole point was that was Lag BaOmer. I think it was 2 years ago. Nonetheless, so he is known as the Rashbi. we get the Rambam and Ramban. But he actually has an acronym, Rabbi Shimon Rosh Ben Yochai, Rashbi, right? So you don't need to think of it. I'm just saying that whenever you get an acronym for your name, it means that you've really made it.
And he's famous because of his contributions.
Contributions, and also one other thing that happened, which I'll tell you about, and for having written, they claim, a book called the Zohar. Zohar is,
Really?
I think we have, thought we had the volumes of it, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, Zohar, which is the mystical work of literature in our people. So, so let's start with, we don't know much about his early years. We do know one thing about his father, Yochai. We know that Yochai was not a scholar. He was more of like a politician. And he was, and this is kind of important, he was an emissary to the Roman world. Like he had relationships with the Romans. And again, not having anything to do with necessarily even Judaism, but maybe as an emissary from the Jewish people, but not for Judaism itself. His father was not a particularly learned man. We know that Shimon Bar Yochai was born around 100, died around 170. So this was after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And even he was born 28 years after the temple was destroyed. So I'm just trying to give you a little context for his life. So he's after the rabbis like Yehoshua, and after Eliezer, and certainly after Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he, in fact, I can tell you, because we know that Akiva was a student of both Yehoshua and Eliezer. And Shimon was a student of Akiva. So if you look at the first text on in the document, the Vayikra Rabbah, that means Leviticus is the name of Vayikra Rabbah, the Leviticus Rabbah, which is the Midrash on Leviticus. It says that Rabbi Chanina ben Hachinai and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai went to study Torah with Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Barak. So it sets and just as a reminder, this is early Vayikra Rabbah is early text. So it's not at the time of Shimon Bar Yochai, but not too long after. So it says they studied with Bnei Barak. They stayed there for 13 years. While Rabbi Shimon would send home for news and knew what was happening at his house, Rabbi Chanina would not send home for news and did not know what was happening. So, how do I put it? I guess really what it's merely trying to say is that, that he, as opposed to Akiva himself, remember, who had no interaction with his wife at all, that Shimon Bar Yochai ben Yochai was wise enough to kind of keep that relationship at least going with his wife. So he was, again, a student of Akiva's for 13 years and was ordained as a rabbi by Akiva, we think. The reason why we think is because of this text. This comes from the Jerusalem Talmud. So now is as good of a time as any just to tell you there are two Talmuds. There's the Babylonian Talmud and the Palestinian or Jerusalem Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is, whenever someone says the Talmud, they're referring to the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, so the Babylonian Talmud is far, far more extensive. It is probably considered to be the more authoritative and worthy version of the Talmud, but can't deny the fact that there is a Palestinian or Jerusalem, just depends on who you ask what the name of it is. But this Talmud was written in Tiberias, so it really wasn't from Jerusalem, but it was Jerusalem was the way of kind of describing it, whereas the Palestinian Talmud, of course, was written in Sura, Pumbedita, these types of academies that were in Babylonia. It has far less material. It is kind of, again, it was scoffed and mocked. Scoffed and mocked by the rabbis of.
Do they mirror each other?
Yes, so they do. In a lot of different ways, certainly in terms of the way that they organize themselves, and certainly in a lot of the texts. And there are stories about rabbis who would go from, usually it was from Babylonia to Tiberias, and would, share what we've been talking about over there. So we could, and this is and so as a way of kind of jiving the two texts. So you're not going to find like that many things which are going to kind of contradict each other. However, you might find from time to time stories in one that's not included in the other.
So these were scrolls passed down from rabbi to rabbi, or
no, they were just kind of written
yeshiva
down.
to yeshiva?
They were discussed and written down in the various different yeshivas that were in Tiberias and kept. Granted, there weren't that many different copies of it. They may have just one record of the conversations that went.
Archaeologically, how did they find them in the yeshivas, or do you know?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I don't think that it was.
How did they survive?
I don't think it was. I think because they were able to continue to write them down, so it was. I don't think it was lost.
So they just survived.
Oh yeah, and to this day, it's not like this is like people accept the Jerusalem Talmud as a version of the Talmud, and it's still out there. Here's the best way of describing the Jerusalem Talmud. So the website Sefaria, which again is my absolute go-to website, I love Sefaria. It has the Babylonian Talmud fully translated, but the Jerusalem Talmud, some parts translated, some parts not. Right? In fact, it's really hard to find a good translation of the Jerusalem Talmud. So in other words, it hasn't even really been addressed by the world to, to kind of bring into the mainstream and into people's thinking, because they're like, the Babylonian Talmud is really what it's all about. However, from time to time, there's just some nuggets in the Jerusalem Talmud which is worthy. How do I find these? Just because I'm reading about it, and I'll read someone who mentions something, and then I'll go to that book, and and I'll just start looking at it and find it, and it's like, oh yeah, it's interesting, and then I'll put it down. So let me read to you what the Jerusalem Talmud has to say. But as you can see, though, it's from the tractate Sanhedrin, so they're mirroring the Babylonian tractates as well. Anyway, this says, Rabbi Abba said, in earlier times, everyone was ordaining his students. For example, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai ordained Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua. Rabbi Joshua ordained Rabbi Akiva. So clearly they, by the way, because there's a question as to whether Akiva was ordained by Eliezer or Joshua. And, it's kind of one of the things about Akiva which made him so exceptional was that he kind of was a student of both, and so therefore he kind of had the knowledge of both in him. But they, in the Jerusalem Talmud, are claiming that it was Rabbi Joshua who ordained Rabbi Akiva. Anyway, either way, here's the part which is important. Rabbi Akiva ordained Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. And that's our Shimon, right? Meir is a famous early sage who helped to copy down all of the sayings of these early rabbis so that would become part of what's called the Mishnah. So he is a tremendous early sage, Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Shimon is, as I pointed out to you, kind of has mythical status amongst many of the ultra-Orthodox Jews. Anyway, he said, Rabbi Akiva said, Rabbi Meir shall preside. In other words, I have an order to who is my seat, it's like Rabbi Meir is the valedictorian, and Shimon is the salutatorian. Okay? You're both excellent. He's number one, you're number two. The face of Rabbi Shimon became yellow, right? So you could tell that he just got jealous, yeah. And Rabbi Akiva told him, is it not enough that I and your creator recognize your power? Like, we know how excellent you are, and God knows how excellent you are. Like, don't be so jealous and just be okay with this. Anyway, they changed and honored this dynasty, saying, if a court ordained without the consent of the patriarch, their ordination is no ordination. But if the patriarch ordained without consent of the court, his ordination is ordination. In other words, so clearly in the past, it was one rabbi could ordain another rabbi, which kind of is like how it is, you hear about it today. But then they changed it and they said, no. If a rabbi ordains, with three other rabbis, then you also have to get the seal or the stamp of the patriarch, of the Sanhedrin. But the Sanhedrin president doesn't need that approval of everybody else. He can do it by himself. In other words, it's not just everyone making Shabbos for themselves, but we have to have some sort of agreed upon, standard by which we make people rabbis. They changed again and instituted that neither shall the court ordain without consent of the patriarch, nor the patriarch without consent of the court. So I guess what it's communicating here is, is it okay that those rabbis were ordained rabbis by that one person? And we would all, of course, say, sure, it's fine. But they just kind of were unclear about that. And so from then on, they said, no, it has to be more. It has to be a group of rabbis and the Sanhedrin, the president of the Sanhedrin. So, so it goes to the next one, which is Sanhedrin 13b. Again, now we're back in the regular Babylonian Talmud. The Gemara asks, and is it so that one man alone is not able to ordain a rabbi? So you can see they're having the same conversation, but just in different places. And so in other words, so they're saying, some of the rabbis asked as part of the discussion of the Talmud, is it true that it's only one, they're saying that now you have to have a bunch of rabbis and the agreement of the patriarch, but is that so? And then he said, because they say, but doesn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav says indeed that man will be remembered favorably, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is his name? So in other words, they say, yeah, but don't we remember talking about how this guy Yehuda ben Bava is like some sort of excellent person? We're all supposed to remember him for some great reasons. And then they go on, this is because at one time the wicked kingdom of Rome issued decrees of religious persecution against the Jewish people with the aim of abolishing the chain of ordination and the authority of the sages, right? So the Romans were trying to just somehow get rid of the institution of rabbis, and Judaism would slowly follow afterwards. They said that anyone who ordains judges or rabbis will be killed, and anyone who is ordained will be killed, and the city in which they ordain will be destroyed, and the signs identifying the boundaries of the city in which they ordain will be uprooted, right? So basically the Romans are saying, we are creating an absolutely impossible, there's no way you're going to be able to ordain a rabbi. The person who ordains is killed, the person who is ordained is killed, the city is killed, everyone in the city is killed, and the boundaries for the city are destroyed. You'd be a fool to ordain a rabbi. What did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do? He went and sat between two large mountains, between two large cities, and between two Shabbat boundaries, between Usha and Shapharam. So, in other words, he made sure to be completely outside the boundaries of any city, so no city could be punished for anything. And he also made sure to go to kind of like this between two mountains, so it'd be hard to find, like some remote place. And there he ordained 5 elders, and they were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, our Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. Rav Avia adds that Rabbi Nehemiah was also among those who ordained. And so they and the reason why the Talmud goes into this is to kind of now to settle the question and debate about whether one person or one institution versus they needing extra people to ordain a rabbi. And in this particular case, Rabbi Shimon was one of those. But the reason why this is important is because they were thought of as the 5 rabbis who went out and saved Judaism. Shimon was one of those 5 rabbis who saved Judaism. When their enemies discovered them, Yehuda ben Bava said to the newly ordained sages, "My sons, run for your lives." They said to him, "My teacher, what will be with you?" Yehuda, he was old. He said to them, "In any case, I am cast before them like a stone that cannot be overturned." In other words, I can't run very fast. They will catch me in a minute. But what I can do is block the path. Remember, we're on this little path between 2 mountains or a cave. Like what I can do is I can basically buy you 5 minutes. And so I'm cast before them like a stone that cannot be overturned. And people say about the incident that the Roman soldiers did not move from there until they had inserted 300 iron spears into him, making him appear like a sieve. In other words, right, he basically kept himself there. They could not move him, and he bought them the 5 minutes they needed to escape.
So before we get too deep into ritual, so you mentioned the 5 rabbis that are said to have saved Judaism.
Basically, it's before they stop. What we can do is it may be hard to ordain rabbis from now on because of this Roman rule. So we're going to sneak in a handful of rabbis to make sure that we have some of them to be rabbis for the future of Judaism. Yeah. So right now, you might be reading about Rabbi Shimon, and you might be thinking, all right, seems like a pretty good guy. Student of Akiva. He was caring for his wife, while the other ones maybe weren't checking in on his wife. He was checking in on his wife. He went and did this covert rabbinic ordination ceremony as a way of kind of realizing the importance of, saving Judaism. And now let's read a little bit about him in terms of some of the things that he did, right? Famous story about Rabbi Shimon. If this is Shir Hashirim Rabbah. Shir Hashirim is Song of Songs, right? So we learn there, if a man marries a woman, again, and Rabbah means the midrash of it. We learned if a man marries a woman and stays with her 10 years and she has not given birth, he may not remain idle. Meaning, he's got to divorce her. If she can't have a baby,
it's not that he can, but it's that he has to.
Has to. In fact, there was a really cool movie. I mean, I say cool. It was a fun, great Israeli movie, and I'm trying to remember the name of the title. But it was basically about this husband and wife who just loved each other, and they couldn't have a baby, and and the rabbi was like, "You got to divorce her." And he didn't want to divorce her. And he was being forced to divorce his wife. And it was like a sad story. And I can't even remember. I got to find it and watch it again. Anyway, so that's this. Rabbi Edie said, there was an incident involving a certain woman in Sidon who stayed with her husband 10 years and did not give birth.
You don't have to divorce, but you can get married again, right?
No, I think you have to divorce. Yep, you can't have 2 wives. Not in that period. Earlier you could, but not anymore. Although I think that they really didn't officially start the not multiple wives until like the 13th century. But I think at that point you didn't hear about rabbis having multiple wives. Not that I can think of.
Akiva had two, right?
Well, he remarried, but then again, I'm not sure. Did he actually divorce his first wife? I'm not sure, because he married the Roman matron.
Not according to that book.
Oh, right. He never divorced her?
I was just trying to think in the book what happened. Did he divorce his first wife in the book?
He didn't.
He didn't. He just married. The gal who came after him.
He thought he was going to have to, but she said that he didn't.
I can't remember. That's all right. So I'm not sure, but and by the way, divorcing a woman is a big deal, or not granting a divorce is a big deal, because then they are stuck. They can't do anything. But then again, it might also mean positive, because it means that you're still forced to take care of her if you don't divorce her. I'm now kind of embarrassed that I don't know what the right answer is to this. But let's read the story. So anyway, there was an incident involving a woman in Sidon who stayed with her husband 10 years and didn't give birth. They came to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. By the way, Bar, Ben, same thing. And sometimes it says Ben Yochai, sometimes it says Bar Yochai. And, think of it like bar mitzvah, because that's more the Aramaic way of saying Ben. Anyway, came to Shimon Bar Yochai and sought to separate from one another. He said to them, by your lives, just as you came together with food and drink, so too you shall separate only with food and drink. In other words, it's like, look, you had this huge wedding feast to get married, so the least you should do is have a huge party as you're getting divorced. Which we might say, really, this is, if they really were in love with each other, then this is not a day for celebration, this is a day for weeping, but this was Shimon's plan. They followed his advice and made a celebration for themselves, made a great feast, and she got him to drink in excess. When he was in good spirits, he said to her, my daughter, see any good item that I have in the house, take it, and go to your father's house. In other words,
Whatever you want.
Take whatever you want from the house. I feel this is awful. Just take what you want.
What does he call my daughter?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
What did she do? After he fell asleep, she motioned to her servants and maidservants and said to them, carry him in his bed and take him to my father's house. Right? It's now getting sweet, right? At midnight, he awakened from his slumber after his wine had abated. He said to her, my daughter, where am I? She said to him, in my father's house. He said to her, what am I doing in your father's house? She said to him, is this not what you said to me in the evening? See any good item that I have in the house, take it and go to your father's house. There is no item in the world better for me than you. So they went to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and he stood and prayed for them. And they were remembered. Remembered means they gave birth. They had a baby. To teach you that just as the Holy One, blessed be He, remembers the barren, so too the righteous cause the barren to be remembered. It's a sweet story, but the point was that Rabbi Shimon was able to, his prayers work, and for that matter, to me, this has always just been a story which was just it added to the sweetness of the persona of Shimon Bar Yochai. And I keep kind of saying this because there's going to be a moment in time when things radically change. Shimon goes from being this kind of lovely guy to being a little not. We'll find out soon enough.
Because he got his doctorate in divinity that he carried.
That's right.
There are some cases where the husband is infertile.
Yeah,
What
for
do they
sure.
do? Did they always assume it's the woman's?
Always assumed it was the woman.
Wow.
I know, which is terrible, but we're like, really? It's half the time it's the man, right? It's not, is it? I don't know what the numbers are. So the Gemara continues to cite similar advice dispensed by Akiva. So now this is now a new story which is about Akiva, and we're reading this because we're once again seeing the relationship between Yochai, Shimon rather, and Akiva, student teacher, and that kind of like the awe that he had for him. And I'm kind of pointing that out because again, things will change. Anyway, the Gemara continues to cite advice. Rabbi Akiva commanded Shimon bar Yochai to do 5 matters when Rabbi Akiva was in prison. So, the story is that Akiva went to jail, and Shimon went to visit him regularly. Beforehand, Shimon said to him, Rabbi, teach me Torah. But Akiva was thrown in jail for teaching Torah. So he wasn't going to teach him Torah. Rabbi Akiva said to him, I will not teach you, as it's dangerous to do so at the present time. Shimon said to him in jest, if you will not teach me, I will tell Yochai my father, and he will turn you over to the government. Remember what I told you before about how Yochai, the father, was not a Torah, but he did kind of was like an emissary from the Jewish people to the Roman government, but he was hardly like a scholar, and he didn't care about Jewish texts or Jewish books or anything like that. He was just kind of like a person, and like a high up there person, but not for Jewish stuff. He goes, I'll tell my dad on you, and he'll turn you over to the authorities. In other words, I have no means of persuading you. You are already in prison. Akiva said, my son, know that more than the calf wishes to suck, the cow wants to suckle. In other words, I want to teach you Torah more than the calf wants to suck and the cow wants to suckle. That's how desperately I want to teach you Torah. But I'm afraid of the danger. Shimon said to him, and who is in danger? Isn't the calf in danger? In other words, you're already in jail. I'm the one who's in danger here by studying it. And so Shimon, it's a statement about Shimon and his relationship with Akiva and his desire to study with Akiva. Let's see if I can. So Shimon, by the way, once he became a rabbi, also was the teacher of Judah Hanasi, who was the redactor of the Mishnah. So in other words, you know, if you base your own credentials on who your students are, Shimon was up there based upon, you know, the student that he taught, which was one of the greats, Judah Hanasi, the redactor of the Mishnah, who by the way was called Rabbi. So in the whole Talmud, anytime you just see the word rabbi, it's referring to Judah Hanasi. So obviously, I guess what's trying to point out is that Shimon was not just a great, you know, mind, but also a great teacher too. Rabbi Shimon rules leniently, as we have already stated, that he permits bathing and drying oneself with a towel and then bring it home. Whatever. All the point was to get to Rabbi. Again, it's when it says Rabbi, it's just referring to him. Rabbi, as it was taught, Rabbi agrees, as it was taught. Rabbi said, when we would study Torah with Rabbi Shimon in Tekoa, we would carry oils and towels from the courtyard to the roof, and from the roof into an enclosure similar to a courtyard until we reached the spring in which we would bathe. In other words, what is this coming teacher? That he was the teacher of this guy, Judah Hanasi, and he taught in a town called Tekoa. So that was where his yeshiva was. Akiva was in Bnei Brak. Shimon was in Tekoa. Just kind of, he had his own place. Now, we are going to skip the next two. I kind of put them out of order. And we are going to go to one last story, I think, for the time being, about Shimon, was how he was sent. So we're going down to where it says Me'ilah 17a. So this is kind of a funky story, and I'll be interested. I think, Jim, you might have some insight about this when we get to the end. And this is a story about how the Jewish people sent Shimon bar Yochai to Rome to help eradicate a decree against the Jews, against observing Shabbat and Jewish traditions, right? And so they sent Shimon with them to kind of do something. To go to Rome, help us get rid of this decree. So, all right, so the first paragraph was they had this one guy. Okay, so this one rabbi, Reuven ben Estrobeli, he was able to ease the restrictions. But then when the Romans found out that he was Jewish, they said, nope, the restrictions are back on again. And so then the sages said at the last line, who will go and nullify these decrees? So we need someone to go. Let Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai go to Rome, as he is accustomed to experiencing miracles. And who shall go with him? Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so then I took out part of this argument that they were having about Shimon was just getting kind of crotchety and ornery with. I just left it out. Doesn't matter, because here we go. This is kind of like a fun story. The Gemara continues the story. As they were journeying, a demon named Ben Tamalion emerged to greet them. He said to them, "Do you wish that I will join you and come with you in order to help nullify this decree?" When he saw the demon was coming to help save the Jewish people, Rabbi Shimon cried and said, "What? Even for a maidservant of my father's home, Hagar, the Egyptian, who was Abraham's handmaid, an angel was made available for her and appeared to her 3 times to help her." I'm going down to the little, but I apparently do not deserve assistance from an angel even 1 time. It's like she, Hagar, not even Jewish, second wife of Abraham, she gets an angel 3 times and I get a demon? What am I, chopped liver here? I'm Shimon, for crying out loud. Like, really, that's what's going on, right? It's like, it is the what am I, chopped liver. That is what should have been written here. In any case, let the miracle come and save the Jewish people, even if only through a demon. The demon Ben Tamalion went before them and ascended into the emperor's daughter and possessed her. Okay, so now, by the way, if you've ever seen the movie Exorcist, this is The Exorcist. There's a demon possessing the emperor's daughter. When Shimon ben Yochai arrived there, the emperor's palace, he said, "Ben Tamalion, emerge."
The fix is in.
Ben Tamalion, emerge. And once Shimon called to him, Ben Tamalion emerged and left the emperor's daughter, and she was cured. The power of Christ compels you. I think that's the line from The Exorcist, right? That's what he's saying. Ben Tamalion, emerge. And she was cured. When the emperor saw that Rabbi Shimon had cured his daughter, he said to them, "Ask for me any reward that you want to ask." And he took them to his treasury to take whatever they wanted. They found the letter there that contained the decrees against the Jewish people, and they took it and tore it up, and thereby nullified all the decrees. Okay, so that's just the story about how Shimon saved the Jewish world, right? Now, the reason why I mentioned Jim, I know it because you always know some of these great references. Like, I think that story is borrowed from other kind of texts at the same time, some other exorcism texts at the same time. Like, I think there was one which was Bartholomew, who is a Christian apostle who kind of exorcised a demon from the daughter of the king of India, I think, I'm not sure. Like, and so it's like it's possible that we were sharing texts with other people when this one was written down. So the famous story about Shimon Bar Yochai, by far the famous story. If you were at the temple for the high holidays, I think it was 2 years ago, then you heard me kind of reference the story. It's about, well, let me just read it. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, that's our Shimon, were sitting, and Yehuda ben Gerim, that just means son of converts, but that's how he's referred to as Yehuda ben Gerim, sat beside them. Yehuda opened and said, "How pleasant are the actions of this nation, the Romans, as they established marketplaces and bridges and bathhouses," right? So it's like,
Life of Brian.
right!
What is it?
Yes!
The movie Life
What
of Brian.
have the Romans ever done for us? Schools. All right, schools. But schools. Other than schools, what have the Romans ever done for us? They make the roads safe to walk on. Okay, safe to walk on the roads. Aqueduct. All right, aqueduct. The schools. But it's exactly like with Brian. Anyway, what have the stinking Romans ever done for us? Well, how about the marketplaces and bridges and bathhouses? So Rabbi Yossi was silent. And Shimon ben Yochai responded and said, oh, right, really? Everything they've done, they did for themselves. They established marketplaces to place prostitutes in them, bathhouses to pamper themselves, and bridges to collect taxes from all who pass over them. It's like, yeah, you think it's so great, but it's not. Yehuda ben Gerim went and related their statements to his household, and those statements continued to spread until they were heard by the monarchy. Uh-oh.
The emperor.
The emperor knows. They ruled and said, Yehuda, who elevated the Roman regime, shall be elevated, and appointed him as head of the sages, the head of the speakers in every place. Yossi, who remained silent, shall be exiled from his home in Judea as punishment and sent to the city of Sipori in the Galilee. And Shimon, who denounced the government, shall be killed. So you have an edict of execution for Shimon. Rabbi Elazar went and hid. Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Elazar, went and hid in the study hall. So they went to the yeshiva, obviously. Every day, Shimon's wife would bring them bread and a jug of water, and they would eat. Now, why did his son have to go with him? He didn't have to, but he chose to. When the decree intensified, and Shimon said to his son, women are easily impressionable. Not the women here or on Zoom, other women, easily impressionable, and therefore there is room for concern lest the authorities torture her and she reveal our whereabouts. Right? So in other words, it's like plausible deniability. If she doesn't know where we are, then she can't, right? Okay. So they went and they hid in a cave. A miracle occurred, and a carob tree was created for them, as well as a spring of water. And they would remove their clothes and sit covered in sand up to their necks. They would study Torah all day in that manner. At the time of prayer, they would dress, cover themselves, and pray. And they would again remove their clothes afterwards so that they would not become tattered. Right? You only have one set of clothes. You just want to make sure that those suckers last. They sat in the cave for 12 years, eating nothing but carobs and drinking nothing but water. Elijah the prophet came and stood at the entrance to the cave and said, who will inform Bar Yochai, Elijah the prophet, right, that the emperor died and his decree has been abrogated? They emerged from the cave. So they've been in the cave for 12 years, studying Torah all day and night, except for when they pray. He and his son, just back and forth, bantering about Torah. Not bantering, literally, studying, talking in a hard discussion. They emerged from the cave and saw people who were plowing and sowing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, these people abandon eternal life of Torah study and engage in temporal life for their own sustenance. Right? They are not doing what they should be doing, which is engaging in Torah. Instead, they're working on the farm. It's crazy. Why are they doing this? Don't they know better? Don't they know that the only thing that matters is studying Torah? Don't they know that if they just would study Torah, then I'm sure there'd be a carob tree that would emerge from them to give them food and a spring of water and to give them something to drink anytime that they need it? What are they? They don't know. They're wasting life. And then it says, the Gemara relates that every place that Rabbi Shimon and his son Elazar directed their eyes was immediately burned. They had Superman heat vision. You know, when, what was it? Marjorie Green said Jewish space lasers? Like this. This is where it comes from. It's Shimon Bar Yochai's space laser eyeball lasers. And so that's what the story said.
You really think she knew that?
Right. She had been a Talmud student. So the point is that everywhere they looked, they would burn up a place with their eyes, which is kind of remarkable. A divine voice emerged and said to them, did you emerge from the cave only to destroy my world? Return to your cave. So, yes, it's safe for you to be out, but it's not safe for us to have you out. right? So they again went in and sat for 12 months. Surely their sin was atoned in that time. A divine voice emerged and said to them, emerge from your cave. They emerged, and everywhere that Eleazar would strike, Rabbi Shimon would heal. So Eleazar still was unable to control himself. He had become more of like a zealot, but Shimon was able to kind of take it down a notch and not just destroy every place. Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Elazar, my son, you and I suffice for the entire world as the two of us emerged in the proper study of Torah. So in other words, he just says, don't worry, it's me and you. So then the story continues. I left out just a touch of it, not because, it's just because there's some other stories, but I just wanted to kind of just bring us back to just to tie up one loose end of the story, just in case you were wondering. And so a certain elder said, in ridicule and surprise, Ben Yochai purified the cemetery. So what had happened was he had gone and he had kind of identified where the cemetery was so that they could build or not build over, and a priest could walk or not walk. And so anyway, Ben Yochai purified the cemetery. So now it's unclear as to how that should have been, how I should have read that. Should it have been, Ben Yochai finally did something good and purified the cemetery? Or should it be read like, Ben Yochai over here has purified the cemetery, right? Or should it be read as like, all right, Ben Yochai's, purified, big deal. He purified the cemetery. Like anyone could do that, right? Or was it, look who thinks he's such a big shot over here, telling like going around purifying cemeteries, right? Or, did he really purify the cemetery? Like there's so many ways to read this.
How do you purify a cemetery?
Because what he did was he identified it. So in other words, he purified the cemetery by creating like a boundary around it so no one could walk on top.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what the story had said before. So Shimon got angry and said to him, had you not been with us, and even if you had been with us, and were not counted with us in rendering this ruling, what you say is fine. I didn't do a good job of describing this. Really what it should be, you should understand that as, you could have just said all was fine. Instead, you had to be mocking me. You could have said that you were unaware of my intentions or that you did not agree or participate in this decision. Now that you were with us and were counted with us, but you were there when we did all this work together, you will cause people to say that the sages are unwilling to cooperate with one another. They will say, if competing prostitutes still apply makeup to each other to help one another look beautiful, all the more so Torah scholars should at least be able to cooperate with each other. Like the hookers are, they at least make each other look good. You're not even making me look good. You're making me look bad. He directed his eyes towards him, and the elder died. Now, that was all just a fun story. So he did manage to kill somebody. So clearly his laser beam eyes still work. Now, but it gets a little funnier, and this is the tying the loose ends together. Rabbi Shimon went out to the marketplace, and he saw Yehuda, son of converts, Yehuda ben Gerim. That's the same guy who at the beginning of the story, went and told his wife, who then told everybody. So had Yehuda ben Gerim not been there, then this 13 years ago to report what Shimon said, Shimon would not have had to go into hiding for 13 years. So who was the cause of the entire incident? Shimon said, this one still has a place in this world. In other words, he's like, this one, really? This guy, I mean, I can't believe that they haven't run you out of town yet. He directed his eyes towards him and turned him into a pile of bones. He incinerated the man right in front of him. I mean, welcome to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now,
the informer.
That's right. Now,
Hollywood would have fun with this.
Yes, they would. Now, the reason why so the reason this story is so, first of all, it's the famous story of Rabbi Shimon in the cave. But what's also, and by the way, I'm trying to remember, there is a philosopher who has the philosophy of the man in the cave, and it's like, do they see, I'm struggling to remember. Shouldn't have, it took me too long to try to piece it all together. But it was having to do with whether they're, if people are in a cave and they don't, and there's no light in the, or there, and there's, like, is there anything going on outside the cave if they're inside the cave and they can't see anything? But I can't remember anymore. See, I told you I don't really focus on the philosophy as much as. So let's talk about some of the things that happened to Shimon after he emerged from the cave. So again, you have pre-cave, post-cave, right? Now again, can you really believe that the guy was in the cave for 12 years plus one more year with his son? Who knows? But something made him into a religious kind of radical. He's blowing up people with his eyes. Again, we know that can't possibly be true. However, you don't write that about somebody unless there was something to it, obviously not literally happening, but they felt like he was just on a warpath. So one of the things is, if you want to go back 2 pages to the 2 that I skipped. So it was Sifrei Devarim 31:1. Do you see that page? So you may have to go back 3 pages. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. These are words of Rabbi Akiva. And so what I didn't put in there, just because it was just going to distract us too much, was like a big whole discussion that Rabbi Akiva had to say about, I can't even remember what the topic was. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Rabbi Akiva expounds 4 things where I differ from him. And it seems to me that my view is the correct one. And my view seems more cogent than his. In other words, whoa, you're now bad-mouthing Akiva. Everyone loves Akiva. And everyone respects Akiva as kind of like the great Akiva. And you're basically saying, no, I'm better than he is. Wow. And then the next one, it's the same thing, just a little change. It is taught in next place, Rabbi Shimon will forget little of his studies, and what he removed from his memory, he removed only chaff. So he forgot about some of the stupid stuff, but he remembered everything important. And likewise, Rabbi Shimon said to his students, my sons, accept my halachic rulings, as my rulings are the finest rulings of the finest rulings of Akiva. In other words, Akiva's got some great ones, but I can trust me that I know what's the best. Listen to me, not Akiva. What's going on here is that we have a very, very chutzpah Rabbi Shimon who now thinks that something happened after that cave that has made him kind of, all that. Right? And so then if you look back to where we were before.
And he was a student of Rabbi Akiva.
He was a student, of Akiva, and which we know that's kind of one of those things. Remember that whole story with Eliezer and Yochanan ben Zakkai, and Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him, hey, why don't you give a little Devar Torah here? And he goes, I can't do that, not in front of you. Everything I know is from you. How could I it's like there's that deference that you have to your teacher that even if you may have some worthy things, my teacher's in the room. He talks. But Shimon stops doing that. In fact, Shimon says in Sukkah 45b, Shimon says, and Hizkiah said that Rabbi Yirmiyah said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, I have seen members of the caste of the spiritually prominent who are truly righteous, and they are few. If they number 1,000, the truly righteous people, if they number 1,000, I and my son are among them. So Shimon's basically saying, me and that guy who was with me in the cave are definitely among the righteous. If they number 100, I and my son are among them. And if they number 2, it's just me and my son. In other words, we're the only ones with certainty are the righteous people in this world. And then one more, Sukkah 45b also, same people, I am able to absolve the entire world from judgment for sins committed from the day I was created until now. The merit that he accrued through his righteousness and the suffering that he endured atoned for the sins of the entire world. And were the merit accrued by Eliezer, my son, calculated along with my own, we would absolve the world from judgment for sins committed from the day that the world was created until now. In other words, like I myself am just like can atone for all, but if you add me and Eleazar's, stuff, we could be basically like the world covered. It's just he's gotten to a place of just such
Arrogance.
Arrogance.
So not to this extent, but we've come across stories of rabbinic conflict before in our studies, and on the one hand, these are human beings, so it's because they're learned and rabbis. But on the other hand, it's mentioned often enough in the literature that you kind of think they weren't doing this literature to kind of make everything holy, and this is the holiest. This is just the stories of the times.
Right.
Life and
this
times
is the stories of the times. And by the way, if you were part of the Spain class that I did, the first one, which was about Nachmanides, and how he was there to kind of defend the Talmud, and he said, hey, look, I guess all the stories, don't take those so seriously. Those are just stories. It's the laws, you have to listen to those. So in other words, these are the stories that Nachmanides was saying not to take so seriously. But I take them seriously because they're part of, this is the best part. But so, I mean, we're a few minutes away, so we can, two more stories and then just kind of finish. And I should first point out to you that one thing which is really notable about Shimon is not one time in any of our literature, not one time, is there any reference to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai interacting with Shimon ben Gamliel. So Shimon ben Gamliel is the leader of the Sanhedrin. Mm-hmm. He is the son of Gamliel II, kind of that bastard Gamliel from before, whatever. But the point being is he is the new leader of the Sanhedrin. And Shimon Bar Yochai is clearly one of like the celebrities. And there is not a single, in all of rabbinic literature, reference that those two had any not that they had an interaction. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But there's not one reference of interaction between the two of them, which is kind of notable. I mean, like not once being in the same room, it doesn't ever once say Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Chanina were all walking together, and doesn't even have any of that. It's not like they were engaged in conversation, no reference where the two of them are part of the same story. And so what does that mean? Well, granted, Shimon was away for 13 years. Again, who knows if that, but he was missing for a number of years. But it could very well be that he had no respect for the other, for the other one, or it could just be that he hated him. It wouldn't be so shocking to me to have Shimon kind of having hating somebody, but it's how do I put it? Like, it is kind of interesting that they never are together, and you would kind of expect that.
Why is he then so holy to the Haredim who are going
because there is no rabbi other than Judah Hanasi who is referenced in rabbinic literature as much as Shimon Bar Yochai. So he is number 2, but considering he is coming after the guy who edited the Mishnah, then it's pretty impressive. Number 2 is they credit him with having written the Zohar, which is the mystical interpretation of Judaism. And well, we know where a lot of places where burial sites are, but those are the 2 big ones. But he's
so far we haven't heard enough about this. Now maybe we will when we start to read the actual Mishnah, but we haven't heard enough about this guy that justifies in my mind why he's the most often mentioned and famous and all.
Well, because he has so many laws attributed to him. So many things, say Rabbi Shimon says this. It's like basically Rabbi Shimon says this, Rabbi Shimon, so that he's just kind of like, for me to have kind of included them would have just gotten really boring, because then we would have just been reading random laws. I was trying to but there's so many, really so many, that it's just like it's off the charts. He, a story about him. The sages taught, Brachot 35b, what is the meaning of that which the verse states, and you shall gather your grain, because it is stated, this Torah shall not depart from your mouths. This is from Joshua 1:8. The verse is, let the Torah, let the Sefer Torah never depart from your mouth. Then if that's the case, you'll be successful, right? Or you will have grain. You can translate it either way. I might have thought that these matters, this is the sages talking, I might have thought that these matters are to be understood as they are written, which means basically, if you study Torah, then you will also have success and, you'll be wealthy, right? I might have thought that the matter, that should be understood just as it's written. One is to literally spend his days immersed exclusively in Torah study. Therefore, the verse states, and you shall gather your grain, your wine, and your oil. Assume in their regard the way of the world. So, in other words, so it's saying not just your grain, it can be understood as the way of the world. If you study Torah, things will be good for you in the world. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says it's possible that a person plows in the plowing season, and sows in the sowing season, and harvests in the harvest season, and threshes in the threshing season, and winnows in the windy season. As what will become of Torah? So Rabbi Shimon is saying, sure, you can just understand that verse as do your job. It's important to do your job, and if you study Torah and do your job, things will be good for you. But what Shimon says is no. Because if you do all of your job, if you plow at the plowing season and do all that stuff, he's like, then when will you have time to study Torah? That's the only important thing here. So he's advocating for people to completely give up all of their worldly occupations.
Now I understand why he's so popular with some of the Haredi in Israel today.
That's true, which is you don't need to do any, because who's going to study Torah?
Yeah.
Right. Rather, one must dedicate himself exclusively to Torah at the expense of other endeavors. As when Israel performs God's will, their work is performed by others, as it is stated, and strangers will stand and feed your flocks. In other words, don't worry, things will happen for you. Study Torah. That's how you need to understand it. Abaye said, now he is 200 years later. So he is one of the Amoraim, he's one of the, not the redactors, but he's just one of the later rabbis of Babylon who are talking about these earlier. Anyway, Abaye says, although there is room for both opinions, that that both Shimon and Ishmael, many have acted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael, which is do your job, is have an occupation, and combined working for a living and learning Torah. And although they engaged in activities other than the study of Torah, were successful in their Torah study. Many have acted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and were not successful because they had to abandon Torah study for the sake of making a living. But it's just kind of funny because it was like a postscript to their, in which Abaye is like, I know it all sounded all nice and good, but the reality is that reality sets in and life sets in, and that you got to have a way to put food on the table. Anyway, last story is told of a disciple of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai who emigrated from Eretz Yisrael and who came back wealthy. When the other disciples saw him, they became envious and also desired to travel abroad. They're like, oh, wow, look how much money you can make when you just go to Cyprus. Becoming aware of this, Rabbi Shimon brought them all to a field near the village of Meron. So again, this is the same Meron, which is where he died, which is really good. Okay, and that's all it's in the Galilee, not in the Golan, but kind of close by. It's like west of Tiberias. It's a mountain less than Tiberias. Anyway, he brought them all to a field in the village of Meron, and he began to pray. He said, "Field," he prayed to the field, "become full of golden dinars." Immediately the soil began to produce the golden dinars before their gaze. He then said to them, to the students, "If it's gold that you want, then take all the gold that you want now. But you must know that he who takes his riches now is also taking his share of the world to come. For the sole reward of studying Torah is reserved for the world to come." In other words, if you're wasting time by collecting gold dinars off the ground that I managed to produce for you here. You should have been using that time for Torah study. You are therefore losing out that much more in the world to come. It's radical. And this is what, so, you had earlier the rabbi who was telling the wife and husband, "Go make a feast, and then come back to me." And then he prays for them that they have a kid, because he's like kind of in touch with the human condition and the how difficult it can be sometimes, and the infertility issues, and he gets it, and the same, and his like at his devotion to Akiva, and I'm just like, come on, I want, like he was joking with him, like, "I'll tell my dad on you if you don't teach me more." Like there's like a very human person there, and a sweet and kind person, the one who was checking in on his wife and the affairs of his house. So things weren't hard, even though other rabbis were ignoring their wives, he still took responsibility. And he was like a sympathetic character. And all of a sudden he becomes, again, to me, radicalized because of his experience in the cave. Not necessarily to the ultra-Orthodox, right? To the ultra-Orthodox, they're like, now he's like really a light. Like, oh my God, now he was great before, he emerged from the cave, and now he's like, he knows all about that Torah study is more important than gold dinars, right? And so they're like, this is amazing. But for me, I see this as a person who became, but he's, and he's the one who is incinerating people because they're not, in agreement with the rabbi agreements, and because of they're plowing their field
because they weren't studying Torah.
Right, they're not studying Torah. They're plowing their field instead of studying Torah, and they're going to incinerate the guy. And it's like, and they're like, and the ultra-Orthodox today are probably saying,
like
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
Right. So they love the guy. So, but we see as a person who, again, we can't deny that he is one of the great scholars, or I don't know if you call a person a scholar back then, but one of the great rabbis and visionaries and kind of leaders and created and institutionalized a lot of what Judaism is, no question. But we also see like a person who, whether or not this cave experience happened, but maybe something else happened that was, because obviously we can't really believe that he was stuck in a cave with his son for 13 years. Like, what I would have done if I was stuck in a cave with my son for 13 years is the moment when he was buried up to his neck, I would have strangled him. Right? So that's the first thing which we realize is untrue, is that they never mentioned one part about how Shimon wanted to strangle his son for just being an arrogant little whatever. But something happened to him at some point which changed him. Right? We don't know what it is, but something happened.
There's a possible synthetic interpretation of these two. The first, the humane side, is before the rebellion against the Romans, when things were going well.
Right.
And the second is after the Romans forbade the study of Torah and persecuted, and then he began to think that this is what is vital in preserving the Jewish people.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. It's a good point. Or said slightly differently, it was after they started kind of, that he realized that he was on a mission. Yeah. And which is what you're saying. That he has an obligation here, and he can't play around, and he can't fool around with people and their babies anymore, like as sweet as it is. But he's got more important things to do, which is make sure that everyone's staying on the right path here, because if not, then we could lose it all. And yeah, it's very possible. Or he could also have just been similarly, but just after that edict, he just got so angry and bitter. And he may not have been a cave, but for all we know, it could have been a metaphoric cave, right? It was like, as opposed to being able to be out kind of doing his thing, he was in hiding. Not in a cave. People knew where he was, but he had to lay low for more than a decade. And he became so bitter about how he had had his life just upended and uprooted as a result of this, maybe some sort of decree of execution towards him. Maybe that, that the bitterness, you talk about, like I was watching this one thing about people who get put in solitary confinement in prison, in jails these days, and about how they emerge from it so fundamentally different from what happened when they before they went in, right? It's like, and so often that solitary confinement is really an unnecessary overreaction to something, and yet this unnecessary overreaction can so deeply change a human being. When you are stuck by yourself in a little nothing with nothing to do, just you and your thoughts, that it's just it's terrible.
It's torture.
It's torture. And so if you think about it like that this man went through basically 12 years, let's just call it 12 years, assuming that there's some truth to it. Who knows? But went through just this kind of like solitary experience, even if it was him and his son. But they're stuck for 12 years, and like you just get changed. And what happens is that you become very bitter towards the people who put you there. You become bitter towards the people who are benefiting, who've been living out of the good life, and parading around and acting like they know everything, and you've been kind of the one suffering. You become bitter towards the people who, so many different types of people you're bitter towards. And you get radicalized.
It comes to my mind, although he wasn't in solitary, but Nelson Mandela was in prison and he didn't come out bitter.
No, he didn't.
He came out even more committed to his mission than he went in.
Right. I would only say though but I don't think Mandela was like in solitary confinement.
No, he wasn't.
No, he wasn't.
He was in prison.
He was, and he had people that he could talk to.
Oh, yeah.
So he was, again, I'm agreeing and hearing your analogy, but what I was kind of describing was a person who was really cut off, as opposed to Mandela, who wasn't cut off. But
Alexei Navalny.
yes,
One of these people.
yes,
You've read about what he's going through. It's horrible.
it's horrible.
Absolutely horrible.
Yes. And what is he going to be like if
he gets out?
If he gets out, which we don't know what that will happen, right? It's like, and now we're talking about like that Natan Sharansky, who was kind of stuck in solitude for the longest time, talks about how it deeply affected him.
He wrote a piece that was in the Washington Post this morning, I think.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, and he talked about Navalny and what Navalny's going through, and
worse.
He says much worse. He was in and out a bunch of times.
Right.
Navalny's in and not getting out.
Right.
And they don't give him warm clothing in cold. He freezes. They give him very little to eat. It's just
it's
he's
awful.
Not well to begin with.
Right.
They're poisoning him too.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they poisoned him, and he managed.
They poisoned him twice. Right.
Right.
And then he's.
It's amazing.
It is. It's
and when I say amazing, I don't mean that obviously.
He doesn't get letters. He doesn't get phone calls. He doesn't.
Nothing. Right. He is basically off in seclusion.
Right.
Both responses are possible. The case that comes closer to this is the case of Ayman bin Zawahiri, who was an Egyptian doctor. He was kept in prison, tortured under the monarchy, and when he emerged, he became head of Al Qaeda. He inspired Osama bin Laden, and then of course hated the existing regimes and people who would put up with.
Great analogy. Great analogy, and that it is. But the people who are part of Al Qaeda, they don't see him as having been kind of like gone. They like the ultra orthodox and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. They're like, finally, he's emerged even greater than what he was beforehand, as the Al Qaeda would probably, as Osama bin Laden would argue too. So that's a great example for sure. All right, this has been fun. You guys are awesome. We're going to keep doing this until Shavuot. That's our, so, hold on, let me find Shavuos. When is Shavuot?
Well,
Because I usually stop my
Today
classes
is
at
Lag
Shavuot.
BaOmer.
What's that?
Today is Lag BaOmer.
So
Today is
16 more days. So that means May 26th is Shavuot. So that means our last class is the 23rd.
23rd, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's funny, it's in my calendar, last period. So that means we have 2 more classes. But don't worry, we'll pick it up again next
Do you post the Torah classes, the video of the Torah classes?
Yeah, well, sometimes.
I won't be here next Monday. I'm going to be out of town.
No problem. I'm glad you joined, though. It's really great to have you.
I loved it.
That was great. We go a lot slower in that class than we do in this class. Anyway, Tom.
I wish I joined that a long time ago.
Olga, nice to see you. Sharon, good to see you.
What's your son graduate?
Thank you, Rabbi.
What's his
Take care.
major?
He's music composition, and he was awarded a